Okay, folks, welcome. We are now going to forge ahead. We're in the cell now, and we are looking at the plasma membrane. We've discussed how the plasma membrane is basically a boundary. It's a very good boundary to hydrophilic charged items because it's like an oil barrier. Pretty much all living cells have an intact plasma membrane. And the plasma membrane does not always look the same. It all depends. We're going to have different shaped cells. We're going to have plasma membranes with specialized looks to them. Okay? So let's start right out looking at a tissue here on this slide. Okay? So remember, a tissue is just one step above a cell. We're taking a bunch of cells and we're putting them together to make the next level, right? Now this happens to be an image of some part of your body from the small intestine. Okay, this is the inside of a small intestine. All along where I'm making this blue line here, this is a whole set of certain kinds of cells. And the reason I know there are cells there is because we're going to use yellow. I think yellow will come up better here. So I can see a nucleus right here, here, here. The control center of the cell is rather evident in a cell when we use a stain and look at it under the microscope. So what they've done here is they've used a stain, and I can see a nice dark oval here in each one of these. That tips me off, and it tells me there's a cell there. Okay? Now the other thing I see is it looks like these cells, for the most part, they kind of run kind of parallel to one another here. There's one cell. Here's another cell, right, with a nucleus of its own. And they're all kind of lined up, okay? The other thing I can see, let's take this end of this structure here within our small intestine, is that if we zoom in to the edge of these cells, there's this weird kind of boundary. It looks like there's something going on here because it looks like a little bit of a thicker boundary on those cells. And when we zoom in, I know this is kind of a blurry picture, but what we would find in this boundary here, right in this area, is that there are actually lots of little extensions of the plasma membrane sticking up like little fingers on that surface, okay? This is an image of what that cell might look like if we were able to zoom way in. And of course this is a drawn image, right? A computer graphic image. But it's showing you how it is that there are finger-like extensions sticking off of these. And when it comes to function, all of these little finger-like extensions give you all of this surface where you could absorb nutrients from your food. So it makes good sense that this is in your gut and your digestive tract, okay, for getting your nutrients. This is a specialization of the plasma membrane. We're working our way out from outside in, and we would call this extension a microvillus, okay? Microvilli would be plural. And they're just minute finger-like extensions of the plasma membrane. And it does just what I suggested before. It increases plasma membrane surface, and it gives you that much more surface for absorbing the nutrients from your food. A real-life example where this really comes to the forefront is if you have celiac disease. People with celiac disease that where they don't watch their diet, and they could actually cause destruction of the microvilli that we're talking about, and then they don't get the proper nutrition because it damages those finger-like extensions. Now, there are also other finger-like extensions that are kind of like microvilli, but they actually are motorized, okay? They actually actively move things around. They're actively mobile, and they move objects and substances along the surface. So here we see this image here on the right of these, which are called cilia. And where do we find cilia? Well, a couple different places. We find them in your trachea, on the inside of your air pipe. There's a lot of mucus in there, and the one thing we don't want is all that mucus to get down into our chest cavity, right? Our lungs. If you have a smoker's cough, what's happened is you've done damage to those cilia, and that mucus can't be pushed upward, which is what cilia do, and you end up with that mucus that you're trying to cough up, right? These are also found in the reproductive tract of females because it moves the egg that is released in the female. We'll talk about that when we get to it. All right, so these are a couple extensions I want you to know about, all right? Next thing on the list, let's talk a little bit about membrane junctions. Now, the way that we referred to this in the earlier clip was cell adhesion molecules. Cell adhesion, right? If you have an adhesive, like a glue, so something sticks, right? Or two cells are interacting closely with one another, that's an adhesion. And take this example over here. Here we have some cells with some cilia we talked about, but these cells are real close together. Let's say these cells have something attaching them to one another. A protein would be involved with this cell adhesion. And some of these proteins are like a sealant that won't allow things go between those cells. Some of them are really strong. So what I'd like you to know are these three various adhesion molecule or cell junctions, membrane junctions. You will want to know that there are proteins that are cell adhesion proteins that are going to play a role in each of these types of membrane junctions. Okay? So let's talk about each one of these in turn, and that's going to be what we do for the rest of this particular clip. So let's tackle tight junctions first. Okay? So in your book, we're looking at chapter 3, I believe, now. You're going to see a mention of these various tight junctions that we're talking about. I'll have to look. It may actually be also in chapter 5 because these cells come together to make up a tissue. But what we're going over here now is what you're going to need to know for the exam, all right? So we have three things: tight junctions, desmosomes, gap junctions. In this class, there is, for good or for bad, a fair amount of memorization. But if you can attach some kind of function and reason for the existence of these various structures, then it'll make a lot more sense and it'll give you something to remember rather than just memorizing, okay? Memorizing for the sake of memorizing without understanding why they're there, that's not going to stick, okay? So let's tackle the tight junctions first. Okay, so here we have some other cells in these happen to be in the kidney. I'm not going to quiz you on where the cell is now, but these are cells in the kidney. And so here we have a cell. We know they're cells because we can see the nucleus, right? I can see that this cell looks kind of like that. Here's another cell that looks like it's got a nucleus in there, right? And these cells are attached to one another. Now, these cells happen to be part of the kidney, and inside here is where you would be producing your urine. Okay, so now let's think about this. If kidneys are producing urine, a waste product, within these little tubes, imagine this circle here with a little space on the inside. This is a cross section, all right? So these are little tubes that run, millions of little tubes that run through your kidneys, and ultimately they give rise to urine, which comes out in the larger tubes, right, like your urethra, right, and then you pee these things away, okay? So if this is a place where we are forming urine, I don't want these various items to escape. I don't want these various items to leak out of the middle here and back into my body. I want to have a seal between these cells, okay? So where you see tight junctions is where you're going to see a impermeable junction between two cells. Now there's a lot of words on this slide, right? Do you have to memorize every single word? No. You might want to have you want to have a basic understanding of the English language, obviously. But what I learned and what I want to remember going into the test is, okay, tight junctions. I think sealant. they seal the two cells. They're making it so things can't sneak between the two cells, right? Like if I put silicone somewhere in my bathroom so that the water doesn't leak out by my tub, right? It's a sealant. And that's what these things are doing. They're like a tight junction between two cells. So we can't just have things that are going to leak between those cells from one side to the other, right? We don't want stuff leaking between the cells. What do we want to have? We want to have tight junctions to stop that. Okay? So tight junctions are sealants between cells. In a nutshell, that's what you want to remember. You don't want to remember lots of words when you're trying to prepare for an exam that has a lot of new vocabulary, okay? All right. Next junction, desmosomes. All right, so here we have a zoomed in picture right here of desmosomes. Let's look at this image over on the side where we have our two cells. Here's a cell, here's a cell. There's our nucleus, so we know that it's a cell. Here's the plasma membrane lying, forming kind of this boundary between the two cells, okay? You'll see right here that we have a set of proteins that are joining the two cells and a set of proteins that kind of like roots from a plant or a tree, extend outward into each adjacent cell. Now, think about a plant or a tree, right? One that has roots that extend deep into the soil. It's going to be hard for you to pull that up, right? It's a strong connection between that tree and the soil. Same thing here. You're going to have desmosomes forming an anchor. Strong connections. We have adjacent cells, almost like rivets between these two cells, and we have these roots that extend deep into the two neighboring cells. It's not going to be easy to tear those cells apart. Skin cells, between them, chock full of desmosomes so that these skin cells don't tear apart. Okay, so desmosomes, strong anchors between cells. Again, though, it is a membrane junction, right? Just like a tight junction. But tight junctions are not going to be strong. They're going to be a sealant, right? Okay, last junction. We'll call it quits for this particular clip. Here we have our set of cells again, right? Our nuclei there. And now what they're focusing on are these junctions down here called gap junctions. Now this term, if you just think about it, sometimes the words will tell you what it is, right? I have a gap. I have a gap between two areas, right? That means there's a hole there, okay? So when you look carefully, so like this gap junction, and here we see there are channel proteins here, and it looks like, lo and behold, these particular proteins line up perfectly between the two cells so that various items can move between these two cells. All right, so we're going to have the ability for things to move through a gap junction from cell to cell. All right, so this is kind of allowing for exchange between the cells that are neighboring one another. And these allow various small things to pass, not big molecules, but sugars and ions, your minerals and salts, right? Like sodium and chloride would be small because they're basically just a version of an atom there with or without an electron, right? So very small molecules can do this through the gap junctions, all right? And last thing I'll say is, depending on the cell, these various junctions may be very plentiful, like desmosomes between skin cells, but then if you look at a couple of red blood cells, the desmosomes will be almost completely lacking, right? So these various specialized parts of the plasma membrane will be different depending on the type of cell we're working with. All right? Okay, next time we will talk about transport, how it is that this plasma membrane regulates what gets in and out. All right?